Hi, my name is Essa Grace, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am interviewing Morgane Boyd today, and they are the author of Ghosts of the Steel Road. So thank you so much for coming onto the YouTube channel, and do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. As Etta said, I am Morgane Boyd. I am a mainly fantasy writer, recently self-published author for the first time, and I am finishing up university, and yeah.
Thank you so much for coming onto the channel. So I would like to interview you today about your debut novel, Ghosts of the Steel Road. It's kind of young adult fantasy adventure. And so my first question is, what was the original inspiration for Ghosts of the Steel Road?
Yeah, so the original inspiration came back at some point in early high school to the point I barely remember like a lot of the beginning stuff for it, but I do remember that I was kind of coming up with this idea of kind of, this main character whose father was like a private detective and he disappeared, and all of a sudden, like, she has to kind of, take up the reins of what he left behind. It wasn't even like I'm not even sure if it was originally a fantasy at first, but that was kind of mostly the idea, was that I just wanted to deal with, like, a parent who's a private detective and then the child kind of having to pick up the pieces from them.
That's awesome that that concept stayed the same through so many iterations and so many drafts, especially with you being in university now. With so much time passing, I know my stories change dramatically from their first concept. So that's great that you were able to keep that core concept at the central part of the story, especially since Melandra's arc with her father and that relationship is kind of the center of the story and her, coming into her own identity. So, do you mind talking a bit about how our main character defines herself throughout the story?
Yeah, so Melandra, she very much defines herself as, that nobody sort of figure. She is someone who very much prefers to be in the shadows, kind of just going through life, not being like the mover or shaker of anything, but, just staying in her lane, protecting what she has, protecting who she has, and, not really making too many waves other than that. Now, that's how she defines herself. That doesn't mean that's exactly, how she actually is. Being in her position on the docks, which in my world is kind of a area of the city that is focused on, information dealing and kind of trying to keep up with, any potential threats to the city. She is a mover and shaker herself, even if she doesn't feel like it. And then, of course, as time goes on, she finds herself having to do more and more of that stuff of being in the spotlight.
Yeah, and she really comes into her own, especially when her father is missing, that she has to step into the role as an investigator and a detective to try and find out where he go and the bigger conspiracy that's unraveling in her city. So, you mentioned that even though she perceives herself as like kind of stay in her lane, do her own thing, be a loner, Melandra also has a sizable network of peers that she knew from school, kind of frenemies, kind of allies. So, how do you manage all of these side characters, as well as like her mentor at the docks, without losing track of them? And who is your favorite side character to write and why?
Yeah, so I feel like part of what allows me to keep track of all these side characters is when I was kind of in the early stages of writing, I do a lot of exploratory writing. And a lot of times I won't just write from the main character's point of view. I'll write, you know, from the mentor's point of view, Lilith. I might write from Aaliyah's point of view, Jeanette's point of view, and allow them to become their own characters with all these worries and all these problems and their own character arcs. And not all of it might make it onto the page in the final novel, but I really try to make sure that I have, these characters and their full personalities and the things that they like to do kind of fleshed out really well because in my mind, it's much easier to, think of the characters not as just the side character in this character story, but more just who are they within this world? And, outside of just, how are they helping Melandra? What are they doing otherwise? What are their dreams and their aspirations? And for my favorite character, I would really have to say it's Lilith. There's so much of her that I've explored it in like my personal exploratory writing, but I haven't got to really showcase on the page. And that's something I'm really excited for readers to learn more about her. And there definitely might be some varying opinions as time goes on about some of the things that she decides to do. She's definitely not, someone who does everything in the shining light of morality, but it just makes her all the more interesting to understand why she does the things that she does.
That's great. Lilith is my favorite of the side characters too. I really loved her mentor apprenticeship kind of dynamic with Melandra because Melandra's a bit of a workaholic, especially at the beginning of the book. And so she's doing overtime at Lilith's place at the dock, and Lilith is like, "Girl, you need to take a break." But at the same time, Lilith is the one who's taught Melandra everything that she knows about fighting, about spying, about investigating, along with her father. And so Lilith is this, core figure in Melandra's life. And, once Melandra kind of steps into doing these things on her own, we don't see that much of her, but I'm really excited to see if she gets more of a spotlight in later books. And I'll ask a little bit more about the rest of the series later. Um, but was there anything else you wanted to say about the side characters before I move on to the next question?
Uh, I don't think so, no.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned this book is a fantasy, and with any fantasy book, there's always super fun world building to be had. So, what was your favorite part of world building for this story?
I think my favorite part was just like the kind of trying to decide how the city of Zeroth would be, kind of shaping up. So it was kind of interesting to try to create a city that had all these sorts of restrictions on it that go very against the way that a lot of cities are made. I am a sustainability major, so I've taken some courses that, talk about, how cities, kind of rise and urban sprawl and a lot of the issues about within, city growth today. And I thought, well, maybe what if urban sprawl didn't exist? Which I know is not the most fantastical part of the world building, but for me, I kind of just thought, like, what is a way that I can make this, city, kind of different than just any other fantasy city? And I thought the idea of, you know, even though, there is forest going on for miles and miles, like being Zeroth, they basically very strictly regulate where building can happen. That's why you get all these very, very tall skyscrapers. Um, and it was really kind of fun to play with like that. And, how would all these people and all this growth kind of start to meld together, but also potentially create more issues down the road. So that's a, more world building that especially kind of gets more into the sequels that gets shown more, but it was really fun to kind of think about like, you know, what would that be like? And, how would that juxtapose with how Melandra has grown up? And coming up with the idea of like, all these buildings are like super, super tall, but she's living in probably the oldest building in the city. So it's this like tiny little thing that's in the shadows of everything else.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I'd love this book isn't illustrated, but I'd love to see an illustrator like depict what the city looks like and all of the different architectural styles that go into it. I think that would be really fascinating because you kind of see that in old cities like Boston or New York City, where you're building new structures on top of old structures for decades and decades. And I really love to see how you imagine that in a fantasy world. So, moving on, what made you decide to self publish this debut novel? What was your favorite part of the process and what was the most challenging?
Yeah, so for the longest time, I kind of, was like, oh yeah, I'll do traditional publishing because that was really the main idea I had of publishing. But the kind of the further I got into my writing, especially because I have been taking some classes as a writing minor that are taught by people who are authors and have been through the traditional publishing process, I kind of started to realize that traditional publishing has always been very difficult, but it's definitely in a very strange place right now. And kind of after, talking about with one of my professors, where he was kind of talking about, if you were to go in now, like you'd basically be doing the same thing that you would be doing with self-publishing, minus maybe one or two things. The more I kind of realized, I'm like, maybe I could just self-publish because then, I'm, I'm in control of everything. And also, I don't have to hold myself up to any standard but my own. Like, um, because obviously there's within traditional publishing, it's not just about whether or not your book is good. It's about whether or not can it fit the trends, can it fit the marketing. So
Mm-hmm.
I really liked that, like, I can just kind of keep control of my book and do everything on my own timeline and not on the timeline of, traditional publishing and the trends of traditional publishing. And instead just focus on getting my work out there for people to read because that's really what my focus is right now. No matter what, I'm going to be getting like a full-time job. So I'm not focused on making a bajillion dollars with my writing. I just want people to be able to read it and enjoy it the way that I've enjoyed getting to write it. So and that's definitely part of my favorite, a little bit of my favorite part of self-publishing. It was also kind of cool just to learn, so many different skills. I learned how to make a cover. I learned how to like do all the typesetting and all the formatting within the book. And just a lot of things I got to learn. My least favorite part, which is honestly nowadays something that I would have to do anyway if I traditionally published, is definitely the marketing portion. Um, my brain does not work very well with social media. That's something that I've learned. I've been trying. I've definitely been getting better, but it's one of those that social media is definitely a skill, but unfortunately, it's also a skill that is constantly evolving. The goalpost is always moving when it comes to social media because social media is always changing, especially nowadays. So trying to learn how to like market on social media while also trying to, get over that imposter syndrome and, being like, okay, I can, brag about myself a little bit. I can talk about myself a little bit. It's definitely something that I've been still learning. And it's probably something that I will continue to learn, 3, 4 more books down the road until I probably will finally start to actually feel comfortable with the process of marketing. Like I tell some people, I think my parents did a better job marketing my book than I did once I actually told them that I self-published, because I think most of my sales have honestly come from them. But it's definitely like understanding how marketing works is can definitely be helpful no matter what area you're in, but it definitely is quite the um quite the wall to climb if you're kind of just starting from scratch, even with like the books that are out there. It's a bit of a climb.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense, and it echoes a lot of my same sentiments about the publishing industry, about like creative control and not chasing trends. But yeah, regarding marketing, I mean that's the reason why I do these interviews. I want to help, boost up independent authors and self-published authors who might not have as much of a platform, or as much reach as traditionally published authors, or who might not have 10 books to their name. Yeah, I like reading debut authors and, being able to help people get their start. Though my platform itself is relatively small, but we're all here to help encourage each other in the independent space. It's the two cakes philosophy of like we're not here to compete with each other, we're here to support each other.
Mhm.
But yeah, I can agree. Marketing is a struggle, and I'm not necessarily. I like marketing other people's books. I like doing interviews with other people and reading other people's books and yelling about them because that's fun. But like marketing my own stuff is going to be another matter entirely when it comes time to do that. So,
Mhm.
um, completely understand. And I hope that this has been a helpful and productive experience for you. But now that the book is released, would you do anything differently in the publishing process?
Well, I mean, There, even this semester, so I'm still in some writing classes this semester, and I feel like I've already learned so much more about how plot works, and I'm like, oh, I probably could have plotted this book a lot better. Even though I do still stand by the story and I still think it's great, it's just that now I have such a different view of how plot works. I've always thought of myself as someone who has been better at world building and character stuff anyway, and my but now like I'm taking two classes right now that we kind of did at least some sort of section very much looking into plot, beyond just like just briefly talking about superstructure, briefly talking about the state of the cat structure, kind of really going into like how do we structure scenes in our plots, how do we balance scenes and sequels. So definitely on like the writing side, I'm like, yeah, there's probably some like pacing stuff that I could have done differently. But on the publishing side, I would probably just say, like, finishing my editing slightly earlier than I had previously planned. My plan had been to just finish it by July 31st so that I didn't have to edit it all while school started. I could have focused on marketing. Unfortunately, just due to how my internship was this summer, I had to take a little bit longer, and kind of ended up getting into the timeline of what when I wanted to market, and also my semester starting up. So yeah, if any new writers are looking for advice, just stick to your timelines, guys. Even though you're the only one enforcing them, stick to them.
I completely understand busy internships and busy semesters. I had the exact same situation with Runaways and ended up pushing my publication back by a year. And it's, yeah, I completely understand the pressures that come with that. But I still think you did a great job. And, writing is always a skill, and it's something that you're going to build up your technical ability with each next book that you write. You're always going to look back at the first thing that you put out and you'd be like, oh, I could have done something better. But done is better than perfect, and you can always move on and grow and learn from here. So I'm excited to see where you go next. And this book is the first in the series. So, how many books are you planning for this world? And what are you hoping to explore in the later installments?
Mm-hmm. So for at least Melandra's or the specific story that has been going on with this first book, I'm planning for 3 books, so your classic, trilogy. I do have at least one idea for like a side story, but that's something that I'm not even gonna really start to touch until I finish the trilogy. And I am very excited because I have been working on the second book, and I'm actually go so the second book I will actually be switching the point of view. So the POV character is not going to be Melandra. She's still going to be around. She's still going to be doing her thing, but I am actually going to have Caspian, who was a character in the first book, uh, be the one to kind of pick up the story where it ended, and kind of you know Melandra is kind of very much coming to her own now, but Caspian's still not really there. He did some stuff at the end of the book. He was able to stand up to Eden, his mentor slash father figure slash not great dude. Um, he's able to stand up a little bit, but he still has a lot more that he needs to kind of learn and grow, being on his own for the first time. So the story is going to be picking up with him as he tries to now navigate, the new job that he has as an editor of the newspaper, and, kind of getting to explore a bit more about his past, because we really didn't get to talk too much about his like full backstory other than just his connection to Eden and, his rings and the fact that he was a thief. So I'm really excited that we're going to get to explore, that side of the story a little bit more. And then in the third installment will be obviously kind of the two of them, with how much they've grown, you know, making that what the last stand, which I won't talk too much about yet. But obviously, you know, the third installment, obviously something else is going to go wrong, even after Caspian, is able to kind of grow into his own. Um, but yeah.
I really like that. I loved Caspian as a character. I'm very excited to see more of him. And I really love what indie authors are doing with these staggered trilogies where it's like changing up the POVs between books. Because that's not really something you see a lot of in traditional publishing, I feel like. And I
Mhm.
interviewed a couple of authors now that are doing this thing where they're like, yeah, I'm writing a trilogy, but like POV changes in each book. It's not that you're adding a POV, but like it completely like just changes course. And I think it's super fun and it gives you a deeper glimpse into the world. And I'm really excited to see where you go from here. So,
Yeah, I'm super excited too, especially because like I will say one of the things that I've been kind of learning with like POV is always that like, the POV should be whoever is going to know and see as the things that you want your reader to know and see. Um and yeah, so hint hint, Caspian will probably be the one snooping around in this next book.
very fun. So, my last question, I always like to give my authors a freebie in case I forgot to ask you about anything, but you'd like to feature it now. Feel free to go ahead and talk about whatever you'd like.
Huh. I probably should have thought of it a little bit more, but I will say, like, obviously this is a fantasy world, but one of the things that I'm not even sure whether or not I'm going to get to explore yet, but it's one of the things that now that I'm starting to learn more about like speculative fiction, that's one of the classes I'm taking this semester. There's definitely a lot more of that fantasy that I could definitely explore within Zeroth and the world in large. Obviously, I do mention little bits about the dragons, which come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, which are obviously a little bit more important in the book than like magic is. But I really would like to explore more about the magic, but and I do, especially because I really liked the idea of like, magic is magic, but people are treating it as a science.
Mm-hmm.
What how well they're doing at it is definitely up for debate, but that was definitely something that was real that's like a really fun concept that I'm the more that I'm kind of working on, the more I'm like, ooh, I feel like I need to fit that in somewhere. But of course, neither of my two main characters are scientists. We do have Cohen and Aaliyah, who are both like kind of scientist characters, but I need one of them to pick up physics or something.
Yes, that would be very fun. I really liked the dragons in this book. I'm very curious to see what's up with them. I'm always a fan of dragons in fantasy, so I'll be curious to see what you do with the magic systems in this world moving forward. But yeah, this book definitely felt more like a character study, like you said, like focusing on Melandra and her arc and her like internal psyche and like how she grows as a character and how she relates to the other characters around her. And like that was definitely the main focus of this book. And I relate to that feeling of like, oh, there's so much I want to do, and there's just not enough page time for it. With like all the magic tangents and all the world building tangents and all the plot tangents, and it's very easy to get all wrapped up in that. So I wish you the best of luck with drafting book 2 and book 3. And to wrap up the interview, what else are you writing? I guess other than book 2, and where can we find you online?
Yeah, so you can find me online at Morgane Boyd Author, all kind of together. You can find me on Instagram and Tumblr that way. Tumblr, I also have Uranium Writing, which is more of my like, casual writing blog. You can also find my website, which might just be easier to just go one of those because it is morganeboydauthor.wixsite.com. And then what else I'm writing? So obviously I have a couple writing classes right now. So I have a couple like things that are kind of being written. I don't know if they'll go anywhere. Like I have a sci-fi because I decided that I was going to try writing sci-fi for uh one of my classes. But really other than the book 2 of the series, I am actually focused on another high fantasy which I'm really excited about. Basically, the premise I like to say is local woman really wants to get eaten by the dragon. Um, so the whip is, I call it the unwanted sacrifice. It's the story of this young woman, Fatima, who has grown up her entire life being told that she, at 19 years old, she will be sacrificed to this great, powerful dragon, Tharsalia. as a part of this like annual sacrifice to basically appease her and stop her from destroying the kingdom. Um, and but when she does go to get sacrificed, she gets refused for some reason, and she quickly realizes that she has to be the one to figure out why, or else the kingdom is going to burn. And I'm really excited about it because it's a very different shift in like viewing dragons compared to Ghosts of the Steel Road. Ghosts of the Steel Road dragons, they're just like another kind of animal. You know, there are some species of dragons that are outright terrifying and can be very dangerous, but they're not godlike. There are some dragon gods, but the dragons themselves are not godlike. In comparison, for the unwanted sacrifice, you know, this main dragon is pretty much at the level of the gods themselves. And the gods are there and they do meddle in the affairs of humans. So it's a much different high fantasy and definitely a much higher fantasy than Ghost of the Steel Road. But I'm really excited. And currently, I'm actually working on a second draft of it right now.
That sounds super cool. I'm very excited for that. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I will make sure to have all of your socials and your website linked, both in the description of this video and with the transcript. And thank you so much again for giving me the opportunity to read Ghost of the Steel Road.
Yeah, again, thank you so much for doing this. It was great talking to you.